Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tbh. To be honest, we have here Kevonn Grant, Kitty.
That's right.
Kevonn, welcome.
Why? Sometimes when I answer that question, I usually say me there upon the goalie, but I don't know if that's appropriate. I'm here, man. Me there, man. I look on you, the better one.
Before I said that, I never understand that saying, but cool. I appreciate it. All right, so Kevonn, we have some issues that we want to touch into, right? But the customary question that I ask all my guests, I'm gonna start with that before we delve into it. So, who is Kevonn Grant?
All right. I must say I watched some episodes, so I know that you always ask that question. So I'm gonna be honest. I planned the response. I am a Christian husband, father, teacher. Um, I guess at this juncture in my life, that's how I I look at myself. I'm first and foremost an individual who believes in God, trying to follow Him the way I understand Him to be guiding me, and as best as possible share that with others. I am a husband of one wife. Um, Johnny, speak of yourself.
Johnny,
And,
shout out.
and of recently, since January 3, I'm a daddy. So if I look a little bit stressed, he who feels it knows it. Um, and of course, I am a teacher full time. My passion is teaching math. Um, I'd like to say that it was perhaps God who led me in that direction uh, at this juncture in my life. So I teach math and try to use that as an opportunity to share what I learned from life experiences with young people, especially young boys.
Where do you teach?
Mayday High School.
Okay.
Well, that's a complicated question. So during the 9 to 5 is at Mayday High School in Manchester. But in the evenings, I also do some tutoring for a company, Good Hope Tutoring. That's a US-based company. So they find persons who need tutoring in math, and I'm one of the tutors there.
Gotcha. Okay. What did you study at NCU?
So there's this joke. You go to NCU, so you would understand. There's this joke because I was USM president. And there's this joke that people tend to vote against the religion majors. And while I was at NCU, there are very few people who actually knew that my major was religion. People thought I studied computer science. But the formal stuff was Bachelor of Arts in Religion, minor in math, and a certificate in phlebotomy.
Okay. All over the, all right, cool.
All over the place. But there was a method to the madness too. Most persons did that concentration in pastoral ministry. My plan going into college was always to serve the church as a pastor for maybe about 10 years. And while I'm in the districts, teaching to the members of the community and members of the church, and then eventually now going to teaching full time. But as I said, maybe it was God. It turns out that it ended up being the other way around. I'm teaching right up. Well, while I was at NCU, I was teaching, and then right after NCU, teach.
So do you plan at any point to go into pastoral ministry?
You'd have to call me on another, to be honest, to answer that one. Put it this way, I still do ministry in the way I used to do it while I was a youth. Well, I'm still young. What am I doing? I still do ministry in terms of going around, preaching, teaching, leading studies, senior youth leadership trainings. In terms of being formally a pastor, I leave that up to God. I have, well, I don't hide it. There are and it's out there. There are certain, if we're honest, there are certain bureaucratic elements to every church organization. It's not just our faith. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, by the way. So it's not just our faith that has this. Every single organization have certain bureaucracies to it. Being the kind of, or my approach to my relationship with God, I could see where there might be a conflict with being a formal pastor employed by the church, and my approach to spiritual growth. So that's the major reason why I didn't even send in an application. But it's not that I would never ever be a pastor. As long as God leads me to find a way to find that kind of common ground. Because I have to be honest, I would be paid as a pastor to function a particular way.
Right.
But at the same time, I have to be true to my conscience.
Right. Okay, gotcha. We won't go into the details of another episode.
Yeah, probably.
All right, cool. So this is how, for our viewers, this is how this episode came about. So episode 11 was with Kerry Sales, right?
Right.
And we had a conversation about, it was mostly about racial issues, mostly in the US. And we're speaking about slavery, its effects on today, whether it has effects on today's society or not. We spoke about reparations, but he was speaking about slavery being justifiable and saying it's the practice of the day. My approach was the fact that something is practiced doesn't justify it or make it right. So we hashed that out, and for our viewers, we can check that out. But you left a comment under it, right? And I'll allow you to express what you're saying, but you shared some of your insight in a comment. And so I said, all right, well, you have some insight. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's flesh it out. So let's start there. Slavery. Biblically speaking, was it something that was okay? Were there different types of slavery? Was some justifiable while others not? What are your thoughts on that whole thing?
All right. Before I answer though, because I wouldn't want the viewers to think I was taking a particular side. Because I think you were both right, even though they were diverging. Is that the right word? Yeah. You're both right, because you are very right that just because something is practiced by the mass doesn't necessarily mean that it is correct. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I also got and agree with Kerry in the episode when he said that right and wrong, especially in this context, was subjective to the times. Okay. So he made mention of people back in the day during slavery periods who could not conceive of slavery as wrong. And I think he did also mention that even in the Bible, slavery was purported as right. So I think that was where I started to comment. So my opinion of it, based on my knowledge of some verses, especially in the Old Testament, and even chattel slavery during the what do they call it? Yeah, I think you can call it the slavery period, but I'm going to use the triangular trade period. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for want of a better term. I'm no historian. But during that period, definitely the slave masters, slave owners, and those who were pro-slavery, even the church, had biblical backing for what they were doing. And then you rose a very, very critical point, where you said that the kind of slavery that we were referring to in the Bible was different. It is true that slavery is different depending on the era and depending on the usage. And so my opinion of the matter is that when we talk about the biblical slavery that the Israelites were okay with, it's a completely different kind of slavery than the triangular trade slavery, the chattel slavery, and even the slavery in Egypt. So generally speaking, slavery was viewed as okay by the masses of people. Even people in slavery, some of the people in slavery thought it was okay to be a slave. But we can't compare that with the kind of slavery that we saw during the triangular trade period, or even Egyptian slavery, because they're not the same. And I don't think that the persons, I think you brought up this point, the person in that kind of slavery, not okay with it.
Right.
But at the same time, because slavery was viewed as generally okay, you would appreciate that the slave masters thought it was okay and thought it was right. And they had biblical backing for it. Well, they used biblical texts to back it up, and that kind of stuff. Okay. So generally, yes, slavery was okay for the people.
Right. So for me, I think, so language matters, right? And so I feel like over time, different meanings or, different nuances are given to different words, right? So many years ago, somebody would be happy and say, I'm feeling gay, right?
Yeah.
But in today's society, we know what that will mean in this context, right? So for me, what I was saying in that conversation, and I'm not going to refer that conversation too much because we are having our conversation. So for me, and we know that in the Bible specifically, many different words, if we take a literal translation of them, in today's context, it will mean something different. When we say the dead in Christ will prevent, we understand that prevent in our context means something different. So you have to understand. So for me, I like to look at that kind of slavery that is, I guess, justifiable as, I think a more accurate word would be servant versus a slave. Based on when we say slave in 2021, we're thinking about, the slavery as in, right. So that to me, I think that distinction is necessary, because if we just say the Bible supports slavery, I think just leaving that open kind of gives a miscommunication.
And no, you're perfectly right. There was this philosophy of thought that I struggled with for some time. Because philosophy is a very broad discipline, and people are studying the philosophy of a whole different stuff. Philosophy of science, philosophy of religion. There are people who study the philosophy of language and communication. And it's an issue I have as well. That example you brought up is an example I always use as well. The word gay, because gay means happy. Even today, that's what it means.
Right.
But because of its popular usage, it's almost as if that meaning has died.
Right.
And so when you say gay in a country like Jamaica, people get, whoa. Yeah.
Yeah, careful.
And even if you say it in America, homosexuals or transgenders get offended. While at the same time, strangely, I don't know if any persons know, but I've met persons of the LGBTQ. Forgive me if I don't get it right? Yes. I've met persons who are not offended by the word. And this is what baffles me. When we begin to change the meaning of words so much, so frequently, so often, over a period of time, it makes it hard for us to communicate. But I have a friend who always emphasizes, say what you mean to say. But it is hard to say what you mean to say if you can use this word for what it means, but because of how people use it, they don't understand it in that. Let me give you a real example. So, creep. When I say the baby started to creep, I actually mentioned that term with one of my students who was a baby sister. And he was like, what? And then I changed the word creep with crawl.
Crawl.
And then he was like, oh yeah. And he got it. And I could understand why he didn't understand what I was trying to say. But at the same time, the last I checked, creeping and crawling were synonymous. And using that word, you could understand. But I guess because of the way persons in his context use the word, he could not make the connection between creeping and crawling. And so it becomes difficult then to communicate across cultures when this one word has a completely different meaning that nobody could understand. And so what I tend to do when I communicate, or even when I read the Bible and study the Bible, is I talk about the philosophy, or I focus on the philosophy of the thing or the principle of the thing. And so for me, there is no distinction between the principle of a slave and a servant. They're both the same in principle, but in terms of action, there might be a bit of difference. As you said, different nuance. And so because of where we are in history, we tend to remove the broader idea of a slave from the word slave and limit it to just being taken against your will to perform strenuous labor that you don't want to do. But a slave in its broadest context simply means a servant, whether you're paid or not. Because you could have a slave, well, in terms of the principle of it, you could have a slave who is paid. In fact, slaves were in biblical times and even during the triangular trade could pay themselves out of slavery. So if a black slave who was under oppression, sorry,
you said even in the time of the triangular trade, that was
yes, man. Yes, man, they could pay their way out of slavery. So if they worked for a particular period and they amassed a certain amount of wealth, I put this in quote unquote because it wouldn't be on par with their overseers or their slave masters. But the idea is that if they work to a particular amount of wealth, they could actually pay their way out of slavery. It wasn't very common, of course, but it was possible. I think and then there were certain slaves who had not so harsh owners. I think perhaps the best example that comes to mind, you could tell I did a little bit of history. The best example that comes to mind would be Sam Sharp. Sam Sharp wasn't the kind of slave as his other counterparts. Sam Sharp was, if I would try to create a social standing, you would have the upper class slave, perhaps a middle class slave, and a lower class slave. Sam Sharp could probably be categorized as an upper class or middle class slave because he was allowed to function as a deacon. He could read and write, which many other slaves couldn't do. So much so that he was able to say to his friends, listen, let us stop the rebellion because I've read the documents that say freedom is coming. So let us be calm and wait until it comes, because he was privy to the kind of knowledge that the common slave didn't have. And so even in the triangular trade period, the slaves weren't all on the same level. So, and that's why for me, a slave and a servant in principle are the same. And that's why you have a lot of persons who are saying, well, slavery was accepted from the Bible. And that was why it was easy for the slave owners and the people running slavery during the triangular trade to quote Bible verses to say, see, it's okay to do this thing. The challenge, however, was, and I think you alluded to it, is that not all kinds of servitude are the same, because the Israelites had slaves, and they got slaves through a number of different means. They could get slaves when they crossed the Jordan, and if they went and beat up the people and take the land, they were allowed to take slaves. They were allowed to take men and women that they decided they wanted to keep and take them. In fact, when Abraham went and fought, I don't remember who he fought against, but he was freeing Lot. Right. He was freeing Sodom and Gomorrah from, they were taken as slaves from war. He went, freed them, and there was this discussion between Abraham and somebody else. I don't remember. I think it was the king of Salem. No, king of Sodom, I believe. Right. He was saying to him, take all the possessions you want, but give me the people. In other words, the rules of engagement were, if you beat the people in war, you are free to enslave whoever survived. And so when Abraham won the war, the rules would dictate that Abraham would now be free to take whoever he wanted as slave and take whatever possessions he wanted. Of course, Abraham wasn't interested in any of that. He just heard that his relative was in bondage. He went to free him. And so he said, listen, I don't want anything, but we have to be true to the rules. So allow my people to take what they want, and then you take the rest, and you can take all the people. That might be my words. I'm not sure if he gave them all the people, but what I'm sure of was he said, I don't want anything for myself. Let the people who fought with me, his slaves, by the way, his servants, let them decide what they want, and then from there, the rest is yours.
All right, so let me ask this now. So when we look at that example, so I understand that that was the practice of the people of the time. But now we have the man of God, Abraham, and he said, I don't want any part in the people, right? And then I might not know every example, but from my recollection, when the Israelites defeated a nation, the instruction from God was to kill everybody and don't spare. So I guess my question is, do we have evidence from the Bible where God himself actually justified when you defeat a person, you can enslave their people? I don't know if there's evidence where God himself justified it.
That's a very, very good question. What I would say though is, I don't think God told them to kill everybody they came across.
No, to be clear, in terms of when there were battles against a certain nation, I think when there was a battle, I think the instruction was always to kill everybody and not to spare anybody and not to keep anybody. I could be wrong, but from my recollection, that's all I remember.
Right. So in some cases, that was the instruction, because there were certain tribes and peoples that I believe God did say to Israel that, listen, if you leave any one of them alive, they're coming back for you. And so there were certain battles where God would give the instruction, leave none alive. But there were others when he would say, you're going into their territory that I'm giving you, but walk around these people. Don't touch them any at all. And then there were other cases where, and I'm choosing my words carefully, where I don't think that he gave the explicit instruction to kill them all.
Okay.
I think there were some cases in which just conquering them was enough. Okay. But just like you, I could be wrong.
Okay.
But in terms of a biblical instance in which God was okay or sanctioned them going in and taking slaves when they conquered someone, I wrote down some texts here. But before I try to go to one of them, we should probably talk about the principle. So there was an instance in which Joseph, when he became big in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
During the famine, there were some people who couldn't survive the famine. And over time, I think this was Genesis 47. Over time, he helped them out, and over time they got poor, and they willingly came to him and said, well, Joseph, buy me
Mm-hmm.
and my land.
Mm-hmm.
I am your slave,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't starve to death.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph, being a righteous man, I would think, actually did that. Dislocated the people because Pharaoh now owned the territory,
Mm-hmm.
and the people were now the slaves. But the difference between that and other types of slavery was that they weren't oppressed.
Right.
They were simply just trying to survive,
Mm-hmm.
and they were willing to do whatever their masters told them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think eventually they could buy themselves out of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And then not too long after that, well, maybe it's long after, the same principle was there, only this time a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph decided that he was going to put the Israelites into servitude, but it wasn't that kind of servitude.
Mm-hmm.
It was the oppressive kind.
Oppressive. Mm-hmm.
And that kind, clearly God wasn't okay with,
Mm-hmm.
because he pulled them out of it with a mighty hand.
Mm-hmm.
Then it takes us now to about Exodus 21. Let me see if this is one example that directly answers the question.
Sure.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus.
While you're finding that, what you spoke about, the example of Joseph made me think about the prodigal son, where he is saying, even my father's, servants are treated better than this, so I'll go back and be his servant or his slave,
Yeah.
So that's a different kind of slavery than, the oppressive type.
Right. So generally, I don't think people were generally okay with the oppressive kind of slavery.
Right.
I can say that straight up. Mm-hmm. And definitely God isn't okay with it.
Right.
Because he even had laws to regulate how the Israelites treated their slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So the oppressive kind is a definite no-no. Mm-hmm. But the principle of servitude, slavery, right, servants, however you want to call it, mm-hmm, people are okay with it. Even today, we're okay with it to an extent. So it's just the kind.
Right.
And unfortunately, as you were saying, people nowadays, when they hear the word slave or slavery, they only think of the oppressive kind.
Right.
Exodus 21, right? So in Exodus 21, and Exodus 21 comes on the heels of Exodus 20, when God is giving the 10 commandments. And Exodus 21 starts with the words, "Now these are the judgments which you will set before them." So in other words, Moses is standing before the people, and it's a similar phrase in Deuteronomy, which we call the book of the law, where Moses stands before the people and God gives him similar instructions. These are the judgments and the statutes that you should set before the people. So that's how Exodus 21 starts. And then he says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he will serve, and in the 7th he will go free for nothing. So this is basically a rule that is being created where they were allowed to buy their own people and make them servants or slaves. So they could win a battle and take the people as slaves, or they could buy their own people, Hebrews, Israelites, as slaves. But of course, there were rules to govern the proper treatment of it. So this was one example in which such a slave, their servitude was limited to a time period. 6 years they would serve, the 7th they could go free. And just saying that, Jacob comes to mind. Was it Jacob? Yeah, when he wanted to marry
Rachel.
No, Rachel. Rachel, yes, Rachel. So
got you, bro.
Yeah, thank you. So he wants to marry Rachel. What he did was to sell himself into slavery for 7 years. And his payment would be to marry Rachel. Then, of course, Laban tricked him and And then verse 4 says, if his master have given him a wife and he has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children will be her masters. Then his wife will go out with him. So in other words, if the slave marries and has children, then automatically the wife and children are also belonging to the master. They weren't bought into slavery, but just by association with the slave, they are also slaves or servants. And this is judgments or statutes that Moses is given to the people. And it starts so with the command or the direction, no, give these to the people, set it before them. And I said it that way. I personally believe it was God who instructed Moses to do it. But like I said, my spiritual journey, I try to be as honest as possible. So because I didn't go through the full context of it, like from chapter 20 and those, therefore, those other previous chapters, it would be fair for me to say categorically God instructed him to say.
Okay.
I think it is God, based on the wording of it. I mean, who else is going to instruct Moses to say these things?
Right.
But to be fair, that's why I say it as general as I could.
Okay.
But the idea is chapter 21 outlines rules that governs Hebrew slaves. Now there's another verse, another set of chapters that deal with the others. I think it's Numbers 31. I think so. I wrote them down, but I didn't do justice to say this was the kind of slavery. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Numbers 31. I have especially verses 25 to 46. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, take the sum of the prey. So this is the one. So take the sum of the prey that was taken, both of man and of beast, you and Eleazar the priest, and the chief fathers of the congregation, and divide the prey into two parts between them that took the war upon them. That would be those who went and fought. And where was I? Those who went out to battle, and between all the congregation, and levy a tribute unto the Lord of the men of war which went out to battle, one soul of 500, both of the persons and of the beasts and of the asses and of the sheep. So you can read the rest. I think they went out to war. Verse 2 says, avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites. So I think they went out to war against the Midianites. And after they won the war, what was happening now in verse 25, this is God himself saying to Moses that, and he used the word pray. What a word, I think you rightly said, if we were to translate it today, we probably would use the word pray.
Right.
But he says, take the prey, and he says clearly, both of man and of beast. And if you read further down into the chapter, it literally explains how many people each category of persons were able to take out. So it was not only a practice back in the day, but it would seem as if God was okay with them continuing with the practice. But again, to be clear, how God would have them treat the slaves or the servants was clearly different from what we had during the triangular trade. In the triangular trade, and I should point out that slavery wasn't just a race thing. The triangular trade, I am willing to say, was race influenced. So it was not just about being able to overpower the people. In this case, because they went, fought a war and won. So it wasn't race discriminatory. We spoke about cases in which a Hebrew could become a slave. So slavery for them wasn't specific to race. but I am well 99% certain that the triangular trade was race motivated. People back then literally felt that there were certain kinds of people who were just inferior to others. And so the black people was that set. They went there, in some cases conquered the territory and enslaved them. And in other cases, they would buy the slaves from the wealthier black people. Because there were some Africans who actually participated in the trade.
Right.
But I feel that the triangular trade was race motivated. Biblically, slavery wasn't race motivated. I don't see any evidence of that. And so it's a complete different thing. The challenge now, however, is that I believe the church during the triangular trade used the principle from the Bible incorrectly to justify enslaving a race. That I don't think was appropriate.
Right. So to sum up all of this, we can say that we can conclude that slavery in the sense of servitude is definitely present and I guess sanctioned biblically, but oppression isn't.
Right, definitely.
Okay.
If I could add to Dale there, and I guess it would segue into anything else we talk about. The intriguing thing about this issue is that there are some things that we in today's society are okay with continuing in terms of practice coming from the Bible, and then other things we are not. For example, I think Exodus 22, when I was looking for these verses, I came across this one and I was shocked, Dale. I'm going to be honest with you. I was shocked when I saw it. I was like, this is not the Bible? Exodus 22 outlines some other things that today we wouldn't practice. Let me not tell any lie on the Bible. So let me find it. Exodus 22, 16 to 18. And if a man entice a maid, you want me to wait or you got
it? No, I'm there.
Okay. If a man entice a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he will surely endow her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuse to give her unto him, he will pay money according to the dowry of virgins. So in layman terms, if a man had sex with a woman outside of wedlock, and this woman is not engaged to be married to somebody else, or even engaged to him, then because he had sex with her, he must marry her. So we're talking about fornication, premarital sex. So if the man fornicated, he should marry the girl. If the father of the lady doesn't want him to marry her, then it was okay for him instead to pay a certain sum of money. I don't know what the sum is, but it refers to it as, what did they call it? Yeah, according to the dowry of virgins. I need to figure out what that is.
Who pays the money? The father or the son? Or the guy?
The guy who had sex with her. So he would pay the father money.
To get her, or
no, instead of marrying her. So it works out two ways. One, he had sex with her, he must marry her. But the daddy has some say. So if the daddy said, no, I don't want you marrying my daughter. Instead, he needs money. And everything is all right.
Wow.
Why I brought that up with what I said? Remember, I started with there are some things in the Bible we are okay with continuing, others we are not. The practice of every Christian church, let me be barefaced and say that. The practice with every Christian church is no fornication. And if you are caught in the act of fornication, when I use the word fornication, I mean premarital sex.
Right.
Because fornication biblically is broader than that. It's just the Christian church, the early church. No, not the early church. Let me see. Let me use this term, and anybody knows better can drop it in the comments. It was the papal church that sort of put this restriction of fornication as being premarital sex. But fornication actually biblically refers to sexual immorality, which includes bestiality. Bestiality, same-sex relationships, pedophilia, pornography, whatever was considered sexually immoral, that's what fornication referred to. But the church sort of limited it to premarital sex. But the point is, every Christian church nowadays says, no, man, that is a no-no. And if it happens, you get disfellowshipped and you have to rebaptize, get atoning for your sins. But here we have in Exodus 22, where it's none of that. The person was not excommunicated from Israel. They weren't stoned to death. All they said was, you had sexual relations with this young lady. You must now marry her. Mm-hmm. And what we have today is, because we are not okay with it anymore, you have Christians instead running away and marrying off to sort of cover it up. That's the term we use, to sort of cover up the act. Mm-hmm. But the point is that there were practices in the Bible that we are okay with carrying over. Mm-hmm. And then there are others, as time progresses, we think it is wrong for whatever reasons, and we throw it out. I say that to say that as honest Christians and followers of God, we should be careful of how we paint a rule. Because sometimes we end up saying to people that God says so, when really and truly God not says so. It is just a rule that has evolved out of our experiences over time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes God is okay with it. Other times he's not okay with it. But we should be careful not to present something as, this is the thus saith the Lord. This is what I believe creates the confusion that we're having now, where the church is saying we shouldn't do certain things. And then you have someone who studies their Bible come across these things and say, but wait, then how you said A when the Bible says B? And then we find our backs against the wall, find it hard to defend our faith, and we create a mess of what the relationship should be between individuals and God. The truth is, there are some things as a Christian faith that are just rules out of practice and our belief in terms of culture. Mm-hmm. And let me put it straight up, because as I said, my journey nowadays is kind of, I use the term honest. We should just stop it, people. Whether you are a church leader or you're just a normal church follower, just stop it, because you're making things harder for yourself as a practicing Christian, trying to evangelize, trying to minister. I have conversations, Dale, on Facebook with all sorts of people, persons who were in the church, left the church, persons who are atheists. And it is hard sometimes to have the conversations with them because we have messed up our faith with how we present these things. Mm-hmm. I don't know how else to plead. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting you said that. I was thinking about this very same thing this week, where sometimes we make the mistake of doing like a plain reading approach, right? So we just take a verse and let's take it out and let's apply it to 2020. Yeah. But there are areas where that clearly can't be. Let's look at two examples. There are texts that say what you should do when you're defecating, right?
Yes.
That clearly wouldn't apply to now. And nobody would argue that it would, because it's not about the specific instruction, it's about the principle. cleanliness and hygiene and all that. When women have their menstrual cycle, there are rules with that, but that wouldn't apply to now, right? And nobody would argue that, right? So sometimes you just take up the verse and just try to apply it, but what we have to understand is the principle behind whatever the instruction was and try to apply that principle. Also, the reverse of that is the jewelry issue. And I have a guest I have in mind, because he did an excellent presentation on jewelry, and I want him to come on and have a conversation. But it's just this week I was reading where Abraham told his servant that he wants a wife for Isaac. And when the servant went out and found Rebecca, and Rebecca offered him water and watered his camels, he gave her a nose ring. Right? And there's some other jewelry that he offered her. So, and there's so many different examples of
like
jewelry.
The Israelites, when they were building the tabernacle, the Israelites gave their jewelry, and the jewelry was a part of what was melted to build the tabernacle.
Right. And now there are legitimate, and I don't want to steal that pastor's thunder, but there are legitimate reasons where jewelry should be avoided in certain circumstances. But it's, as you said, it's how we present some things and how we present certain things as inherently wrong, but biblically there's no backing for it. And so we kind of make a mess, as you said, of our beliefs and the why behind the belief. Because young people aren't stupid. Young people are intuitive. Young people, they want reasons. It's not enough to just say, don't do this, don't do that. Why? Why shouldn't we? And if the reasons don't make sense, then that's where we come into problems.
You're right. And I've seen so many persons leave the faith. And when I say leave the faith, I don't want people to think that, it's this big bad thing if you're not a part of the faith. I use it because that's really what it is. They were former members of the faith. They believe certain things. They no longer believe. And so they leave their faith, or they turn their backs on their faith, because they got some messed up answers to some genuine questions. I remember somebody, I saw him the other day after years, as I went to NCU, didn't come back to my home church very often. And he was a new convert and studying his Bible deeply. And I remember coming back once and I didn't see him any at all. And it dawned on me that the reason he probably left, because I remember him asking, and perhaps he can get somebody else, not me, to answer this question. He says he reads the New Testament and Paul presents Jesus as not 100% God from the beginning. Because there's this verse where Paul says that he is now sitting at the right hand of the Father, which kind of gives the idea that Jesus didn't have his authority all the time, and so it was given to him. And he could not find the answer to his questions. I guess persons basically just told him that, are you doubting the word? That's a popular phrase. Are you trying to say that Jesus isn't God? And that kind of thing. But the guy isn't an idiot. He's reading his Bible. He has a genuine question. It's better you say you don't know. Or it's better you have a conversation with him and try to study it some more and figure it out. Or just be honest and say, boy, I don't think I'm going to figure it out. Maybe God will someday in the future shed some light. But to downplay it and create this weird dogma, this weird rule that prevents people from trying to find out the truth, when God himself says, come and let us reason together. That does no justice to your faith. The faith that you claim is true, and you're trying to get more and more people to be a part of. If people practice what we want them to do, study the word, they are going to come across these conflicts of interest. And that is why religion on a whole is where it is, where you have so more and more people who were former subscribers of a religious faith, whatever it was, who are now questioning religion altogether And we have so many Black people who are saying religion as it is now was created by the white man to oppress Black people, which I don't believe, by the way. It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't think we can debate it, no. But that is why I think that is why they are where they are. Because having subscribed to the faith, they examine the faith, come across these conflicts of interest. And sometimes the conflicts occur because we have some rules or some beliefs that are just based on our socialization, but we present it as the thus saith the Lord. And then now when you find a contradiction in the Bible, yes, I did say contradiction. When you find a contradiction to that kind of practice, then you begin to question it. Which one is correct? And then you find people who come up with these weird excuses that don't make sense. And so what do you leave a logical thinking person to conclude? They can only conclude that this thing is made up. Some go as far as to say to oppress a certain demographic. Some say there can be no God altogether because it just doesn't make sense. And it creates a whole mess of the faith. And then later down the line, you find these other persons who try to come up, some with sensible responses. The damage is so great that they are almost not willing to listen to these legitimate responses. And I think that's what's happening right now, especially with, as you said, a lot of young people who are sensible and reading and faced with so much information. I have a burden, Dale, trust me. I have a burden with it when it comes to that. And it could be easily solved if we as Christians just accept what we believe for what it is. I know Hebrews, I think it's 12 verse 1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And I don't think many persons understand what that means. Paul is not saying that all of what you believe is proven. Faith, by definition, is believing in something that is illogical, something that is not likely to happen. And so I have a lot of atheist friends who say, you believe in this fantasy thing, this made up thing. And I accept it, yes, it's fantasy, but I wouldn't say made up. Fantasy in the sense that I cannot prove a lot of what I believe. That is what faith is by definition. But the beautiful thing about faith, and if we had spoken about faith in the honest way, we would have solved many of these problems. The beautiful thing about faith, when Paul says it is the evidence of things not seen, when a person embraces a particular faith and they try it, and they do this over and over, and they recognize a particular result, then for that individual, it becomes the evidence that they need. So I subscribe to this faith, and this faith comes with certain principles. And I do this thing repeatedly, and I recognize that I genuinely have a higher quality of life compared to when I didn't have this faith. Why should I not believe that what I am practicing, what I believe in, truly has some element of truth, even if I don't have the whole truth? Something is happening. So there must be some, what scientists call causation between my faith and my experiences. And I think that's why when Jesus was interacting with everybody, he had this approach, come and see for yourself. That was Jesus's approach all the time. People would question him with some stuff, and Jesus didn't belittle their reservations. My go-to example is always Nicodemus. There are four attitudes of philosophy. Big up yourself, Dwight Rose. I learned this studying philosophy of science.
Dwight Rose.
Yes, man. That was perhaps my all favorite class. And there were times when he and I would debate. Class would end and we'd stand down there by Field View, a group of us, and we debate some things. He and I don't agree on everything. But that class opened my mind to a new perspective of religion that I think if more persons saw, it would become a lot more palatable. So there are 4 attitudes of philosophy, and I don't want to take up the time, so I won't go through all of them, but I'll mention them. The comprehensiveness, flexibility, self-awareness. Is that it? Yes, self-aware, comprehensiveness, flexibility, penetration, and I think it's self-awareness.
These are the 4 what? What are these?
Attitudes of philosophy.
Okay.
So they are literally how you practice philosophy, how you act as a philosopher, as a person. Yes, it is self-awareness. Penetration, comprehensiveness, flexibility, self-awareness. So Nicodemus, I think it's John 1. Yes, John chapter 1, towards the end, where I think it's Andrew. Not Nicodemus. Did I say Nicodemus?
Yeah.
Nathaniel.
Okay.
Nathaniel. My bad. Not Nicodemus, Nathaniel. So I think Andrew, they all met Jesus. They had their interaction with Jesus. And then I believe it was Andrew who came to Nathaniel and said, Nathaniel, we found the Messiah, you know. And he actually found Nathaniel under a tree studying the word. And they said, found him? Yes, man, we found him, Jesus of Nazareth. And then Nathaniel sit back and said, that don't sound right. Nazareth, that place of Nazareth apparently had a bad reputation. But if we were to assume certain things and go deeper with the kind of person Nathaniel was, found him studying those scriptures, chances are, beyond the Nazareth issue, Nathaniel probably read his Old Testament and realized that no way could you call the Messiah Jesus of Nazareth. Because all the prophecies pointed to Bethlehem. So just hearing Jesus of Nazareth and not Jesus of Bethlehem is a clear red flag. Now, if we were to follow how we approach religion today, if we heard Jesus of Nazareth, we wouldn't even look. Because we are cultured into saying, this is the truth, don't depart from the truth. Anybody says anything other than this, turn it away. And that's why persons don't accommodate discussions with certain classes of certain people from a particular denomination. Because they're wired into thinking, don't listen to anything they have to say, they don't have the truth, which is wrong. If Nathaniel wasn't flexible, this is one of the attitudes of philosophy, which says that accept that you don't know everything. And because you don't know everything, be willing to change your opinion in light of overwhelming evidence. Nathaniel was told to just come and see for yourself, which is this other attitude of philosophy, comprehensiveness, being willing to learn as much as you can about the information to make a decision. Nathaniel was both comprehensive in his search and flexible because he was willing to go and see, even though all the evidences point elsewhere. And when he went and saw for himself and interacted with Jesus for himself, flexibility took over. And he said, there is no way I can deny that there is some amount of truth to this man. Let me at least follow him. If we were like that, religion wouldn't be this bad word on the lips of so many persons.
It's so interesting you brought that up, because when we look at that example, Jesus did meet the Bethlehem requirement, right? But that's not what was presented to him. So he immediately rejected it because it wasn't presented in the way he wanted it presented, right? So I agree with you. I always say, because I've heard persons say we have to have an open mind And people take open mind to mean you accept everything. But to me, open mind means you scrutinize everything, right? Mm-hmm. So it means you give it a listen and then you examine it. And then, as you said, if there's overwhelming evidence, then you have to be flexible enough to accept it, you know? So I don't subscribe to the not even listen, don't even, you know, as you said. Mm-hmm. So yeah, man, that powerful. I never even thought about the Nathaniel thing like that.
Bless the Lord for it.
Indeed.
And thank Doctor. I'm calling you Dr. Rose, Mr. Rose.
All right, Kevonn. I know we're supposed to talk about gender, but it looks like I'm gonna have to have you back in it.
Oh,
that's definitely a topic that I want us to have a part 2. And I've said that to a couple persons, and I mean to, but I really want to have an immediate part 2 because I think this gender issue is one that we definitely need to flesh out and you know, look at a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that is an issue now because again of our approach to knowledge coming from the word. And it's a big thing that I believe more and more people would want to hear about. Because if they're like me and you, they're probably bothered by all this information about it on Facebook, Instagram, church bulletins. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So definitely I'm gonna have you back and we just flesh out that. But Kevonn, I just really want to thank you for coming in and shedding light. You know, I'm sure I learned a lot, and I'm sure my viewers would have gotten something from it as well.
Blessings, man, every time. And keep watching, everybody. Yes, this is an amazing program. Every Friday night, I look for one. I watched the one with Obed Bad last week. That was what I watched last week. Week before was Scary Sales. And I have some more to catch up on because I just started. Okay,
cool. So for the people, it's every Friday night and Sunday night. Here's why. There's some topics. So I'm an Adventist as well, and there's some topics that I don't think are fitting for a Friday night. Right? There's some secular issues, and there's another thing that I had in mind to speak to you about because I know you're into your politics as well.
Oh, yes, man, anytime. And I promise to be fair about it.
All right. So I'm gonna have you on a Sunday afternoon, yeah?
No problem.
Cool. Big up yourself, Kitty.
All right, bless up, Dale.
Gentle people.
Blessings to the viewers.